You're with Julian on the Brown Note. And I guess there are certain recurrent themes on this show, and the housing market in Sydney and globally really is certainly in the Western world. It's almost like housing inaffordability is behind sort of like climate change and COVID as like the great plague that humanity faces. In Australia, we've got probably the worst end of it, but it is leaching even into America now, and it has done for more than a couple of decades. But it used to be in America you could always afford to buy a home. It's not like that anymore. But Sydney is like the epicenter of the world. I mean, the only places worse than Sydney aren't even places where people expect to ever own your own home and never did in the past. Somewhere like Hong Kong, where they might, get a very, very small flat for the entire family. But we've had 2 years. This is how disconnected we are. Like, anyone that has followed the global financial crisis, there's this bit at the start where Christian Bale, playing Mark Berry, is talking to a potential candidate for a job and saying, do you see anything weird about the fact that wages are going down, unemployment's going up, but the housing market is still rising? In Sydney, for the last 2 years, we've had, even if it's, I've often gone on about the Liberal Party and their declining economy not being reported by the media in Australia, and that's the number one reason for the YouTube channel to exist. Thank you. Was that someone see me? But the economy has, like, since the Liberals took over from Labor over a decade ago, 2013 they took over, the Australian economy was ranked first or second in the world. And we've gone backwards, and no one said anything. And we've got the lowest wages growth for 40 years, the lowest growth for 40 years. We've got the largest percentage of people not working full-time employed, as in not having a full-time contract. The lowest percentage of the workforce, the highest percentage of the workforce working a second job. And they keep telling us that unemployment is at an all-time low. By just about every metric, the economy has been tanking. But even just basing it on COVID, the last 2 years, how many people work in retail, own retail establishments, work in hospitality or own hospitality establishments? It would be a pretty mild guess to say that they've lost 50% of their money over the last 2 years. And you would imagine there would be probably, even in Sydney, maybe nearly 1 million people affected by that. Now, in that time, the housing market has gone up to record highs and rents have exploded. So, how is that possible? How is it possible when no one is getting wage increases, we have historically high costs of living, and we've just had 2 years of COVID knocking the living crap out of the economy, but the housing market still goes up and rents still go up? How in any way does that follow any economic sense? I mean, I've brought this up because I've had some people come through my place. I rent a one-bedroom flat. I get the average Sydney wage, just about spot on. Now, there was a point where the average wage, your birthright, was to one day own your own home. As I've mentioned several times, the average median price for a three-bedroom home in Sydney in 1981 was the equivalent of 250 grand today, or 3.5 times the average wage. It is, in fact, now more than 15 times the average wage. We're approaching like 1.5 million for the average three-bedroom home in Sydney. There is a massive disconnect since 1981 and today. It started going up at the end of the 80s, when neoliberal economic policies started to make sure that income inequality and the amount of wealth that the people had started widening. More went to the top, and they used it to invest in the stock market and in property, driving up prices. But since 2000 in Sydney, when John Howard passed a raft of measures that gave people that own more than one property and rented it out, gave them enormous tax break for that. gave franking credits, which has grown from 500 million a year to about 8 or 9 billion last year, which is a tax giveaway to people that they then spend on the housing market. And just generous tax breaks to wealthy people left, right and centre, who then spend that money on property. It is all largesse. We've funneled an enormous amount of money to the top end of the spectrum, who have then raised all of our living expenses, mainly with rent. It used to be the birthright of you to own your own home, if you earn an average wage, at some point in your life. And now, I'm thinking, I really hope they don't move me out of my flat, because I don't know if I can afford a one-bedroom flat. So I've gone from owning my own three-bedroom home in 1981 to not even being able to rent a one-bedroom flat in Sydney. And that is infuriating. And it's all deliberate, and it's all gone to benefit people at the top. We are basically like, the baseline of what it is affordable to live now is beyond the average wage. And that isn't living in your own home, that is renting out a shoebox. How does such a rich society as Sydney get into this place? This is exactly the same in London. And it's happened virtually over the same time frame. We're the sharecroppers of the modern era. Renters are basically sharecroppers. We're going to spend our whole lives giving all of our money to somebody else. It used to be that you would pay money into a property that was your investment, that you would pass that wealth on. You would have something to show for it. I have spent 500 grand since 2004 on rent, and I don't have anything. Now, the way that the system's set up, it is exclusory to people that don't already have property. If you haven't got wealth, parents that bought when it was good, or you aren't someone that's benefited from the system and have a ridiculous amount of money, you can spend a fortune on rent that used to be way above what people would spend on a mortgage, and you'll barely get a one-bedroom flat out of it now. And you'll never get a mortgage because they can't trust you to pay. I pay over $2,000 in rent a month, but I would never qualify for a mortgage. And what would I get when it's 15 times the average wage to buy a median house? When it's probably 8 or 9 times the average wage to buy a two-bedroom flat? We're basically we are the sharecroppers. This is like the ultimate embodiment of capitalism, where, like the big behemoth comes in and shuts down all of the small shops. We now got people just have rental properties, and they just price everyone else out of the market because they've got the bigger thing at the start, and no one can compete with them. I've seen the down the street where I live, where they have auctions, and it's always the couple with their dad standing there, who has a house from 1989 that's now worth $2.5 million that wins the auction. No one can buy a house when it's 15 times the average wage. No one can buy a flat when it's 8 or 9 times the average wage. We're just shut out. And this is an astonishing egregiance that we should be rioting in the streets about. This is rich people not only keeping their money and being able to pass it on and add to it, but taking our life's wages, because we won't have anything left at the end. We've spent all of it on their mortgage. It's not our money. We've worked our whole lives just to pay off someone's debt, just for the privilege of having a home to live in that we don't own in any way, because we need one to work for them to pay off their mortgage. They can't quite put us in tents yet, but I'm waiting for it. Our parents traditionally earned less money than us, and my dad owned a home his whole life, and he's now living in a very, very nice 4-bedroom home in New Zealand. He worked terrible jobs on terrible wages, but he bought a 2-bedroom house in London, a 3-bedroom house in Essex, and now a 4-bedroom house in New Zealand, without ever earning anything close to what I earn. And I have nothing at all. So why are we supporting this false economy? when it all crashes, it's going to be us that pays as well. All we've done is shift an enormous amount of money onto the bank books. Imagine how much money in mortgages was out there in 1980 versus how much is out there today. It's all fueled by debt, and it has an enormously negative impact on the economy, because if we had decent housing affordability and decent rent affordability, we could spend all that extra money in the economy, in other businesses, and we don't. We spend it all on rent, or if you're lucky, on a mortgage. So this is a cancer on society that is, for me, it's as telling as climate change. It affects such a large proportion of our people in society already, and has done for the last 15 years in Sydney. And it has such a negative impact on the economy, and it has rendered such a large proportion of people not able to enjoy the benefits of their labour by keeping the money that they've earned in their lives, or passing it on to their children, because you're passing it on to someone else's children. It's pretty infuriating.